Hey, I'm Sarah, and this is the Goddess in Training podcast. This isn't about being perfect or polished or having it all figured out. This is about what happens when you actually start listening to your body, your intuition, your patterns, your truth. I'm asking big questions and having real conversations, sometimes messy and sometimes magical, with people who've lived through it, grown through it, and still don't have all the answers. If you've ever doubted yourself, betrayed your gut, or wondered if you're the only one, you're not. Let's talk about it. Hi, welcome back to Goddess in Training. I'm Sarah, and today's conversation is one I wish I could time travel and hand to every single nonprofit I've ever worked for. I'm joined by Tina Krall, longtime fundraiser, cultural disruptor, and the brilliant force behind Mission Craft and the Fundraising Culture Lab on Substack. Tina has spent nearly 30 years in the nonprofit world and has come to a radical, necessary conclusion. Our sector doesn't have a fundraising problem, it has a culture problem. But this conversation isn't just for fundraisers. If you've ever worked for a nonprofit, volunteered for one, donated to one, or served on a board, this episode is for you. If you believe that culture is infrastructure, if you've ever burned out in a mission-driven space, or if you're building something new and want to do it differently, pull up a chair. Tina and I talk candidly about micromanagement, misalignment, intuition and fundraising, the power of saying no, and why so many brilliant people are fleeing the nonprofit world, not because of the work, but because of the systems around it. She's building a new model rooted in clarity, collaboration, and care. This is a must-listen conversation about leadership, boundaries, and rebuilding from the inside out. Let's get into it. Thanks for joining Goddess in Training. I am Sarah, and today I am here with Tina Krall. I met Tina on Substack, where I have met so many wonderful, wonderful people. If you're not there, you should be there because it's kind of the anti-social media in a way. And so as a professional fundraiser, I think I found Tina right away. Read everything that she's writing, and I'm like, yes, 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 yes.
Check the box.
Exactly. And I'm kind of wishing that I had you as a resource when I was actively working as a fundraiser, which I may do sometime soon again. But yeah, so Tina, thank you so much. And I'm so excited to dive in and learn more about you and your background and how you got to be where you are today on Substack and coaching people. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm excited to be here. And when I meet another fellow fundraiser or recovering fundraiser, as I should call ourselves, I get very excited. Yeah, happy to talk a little bit about Substack. And I have to also say that Substack has been so refreshing. I've met so many wonderful people, and it's a common theme. I think many of us kind of solo entrepreneurs or anyone who is just looking for somewhere to kind of share whatever their thoughts are, and no judgment. And I have to say, what I also really like is been supportive in the fact that anything I talk about, if someone maybe doesn't agree, there's always really positive dialogue around things. Mm-hmm. You don't see that in like LinkedIn and all those other horrible places we shall not name.
Yeah, you don't really see dialogue at all. It's just kind of like anonymous bomb drops on other social media where like Substack, it's like people actually take a breath and think before they type. And it's so refreshing.
I don't want to say this specifically, and I don't have the data. You're seeing a lot more mature voices, and I'm going to say I'm a mature voice because I'm not a 20-something. I think a lot of people kind of at this stage, midlife and beyond, are finding the platform and revealing their true selves, which I think at this age we have a much better sense for, which we can talk more about. I think our journeys and how we've come to the work we're doing. So.
Yeah. Well, dive into that for me. Sure. Tell me, how did you become a fundraiser, and do you think fundraising is fun?
Oh, goodness, that's a stacked question. So I trained to be a musician. I wanted to be an opera singer. I had played piano. I did musical theater growing up in high school, and I got to college, and I had been playing piano a long time, and I just started taking voice lessons, and I'd always performed. And at one point, I was like, really like, I want to be at the Met. I want to be, And through that process, there's always, first of all, your parents in the back going, what are you doing with yourself? I was very fortunate. I had an incredible mentor and advisor who said, you want to try an internship? and it's more the administrative. So I can't remember which year it was in college. I had an internship at an opera company where I went to school in Florida in the development department. And it clicked for me. And I thought I can continue working in this environment. I can continue to sing and enjoy singing and love it, not be the struggling, starving artist, which, it takes a certain level to really make it. And I'm like, maybe not so much. So I started off in the arts. I got my master's in arts management with a focus in fundraising. I moved up to DC from Florida and started working in arts organizations. And I have to say now, reflecting back on this work that I'm doing now, talking about culture and fundraising, specifically in smaller arts organizations, there was a lot of dysfunction. But, when you're young, you're just kind of going through the mix. I eventually ended up in healthcare, and that's where I'd been for a really long time. I felt very passionate about that, particularly patient advocacy, helping people going through their own personal health issues, which I have as well myself. But as I kind of rose up the ranks, I started to see more and more a lot of issues. And I think you speak with anyone who, especially as a fundraiser, you will say, hey, have you ever had that issue? And there's a little bit of eye rolling. Oh, yeah, it's just the way it is. Or, oh, my gosh, I'm still recovering. You see a lot of fundraisers who will change jobs frequently, which I certainly did because I never could find the right environment. So I'm going to be real honest about what happened. So I was a chief development officer for a national organization before I went out on my own. And this was a position that was new for the organization. The board was really adamant that the executive director at the time bring in someone who that was their job at that high level. She had been doing things on her own, had some development support. Again, pretty prominent national organization. I knew that there were going to be some issues going into that. And I would say I've always been one, and perhaps it's how my childhood was, how I just navigated being able to work with different types of people, because in fundraising you do, and that speaks to the culture, which we'll talk more about. So started this position, really excited, incredible work. So much to do, so many things to change in a positive way. And it was very clear that she did not want me there. Long story short, about a year into the position, things just started to take a nosedive. I was very unhappy. I felt like I couldn't be my professional self. I was micromanaged, and I use that word carefully, but I really was micromanaged. I tried to take an active role in finding the middle ground with this person. The board was aware. I was trying to be very proactive, and no matter what I did, she just did not want to let go. I had this pattern. I'd seen this pattern with women who were about 10 years older than me. Female bosses. Oh
my gosh, yeah.
Female bosses, right? And I'm like feminist. I have 2 daughters who are feminists, but I have to tell you, working with all women, particularly in this organization, was cliquey. So long story short, I was meeting my goals. I was doing all the things the board hired me for, and she decided to put me on a performance improvement plan. Not because I wasn't performing, but because I was not doing the things the way she wanted me to do, and even shared words with me, we don't do things like that here. I was actively trying to look for a job. I was talking to the board. It was a really stressful time. Not only was it stressful, it had me questioning my self-worth. Am I good at this? Which I'd had this issue in previous jobs, but this was really bad. I was kind of at the top at this point. So went through the PIP. I just at that point was kind of turned off. I was just trying to do my job. Things calmed down a little bit. She seemed happy. And then I went on a trip that April that year with my daughter, her last spring break in high school, came back. She said, hey, I want to meet with you on Friday. And it was not anything surprising. Get on Zoom. There she is with the director of HR. I knew. She said the board has decided to eliminate your position. So I always say there's opportunity where there are challenges. And I'm not going to lie, it really did a number on me. I mean, my self-worth, depression, you name it, questioning, why am I doing this? I had been in those places before in the fundraising world previously. But at this point, I don't know if it was being 50 years old at the time. I don't know what it was. I just thought, what am I doing? And, I was in a really deep, dark hole.
Yeah.
So I started interviewing, talking to people, working with every recruiter possible. Would get really close, nothing would click. And at the same time, I kept thinking, I don't know if I want to keep doing this.
That's where I am right now.
Like, there's so much that I love about nonprofit work. I had tried to leave once, And I came back, and I think I don't know, it's because I'm an Aquarius. I don't know.
I am too. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so we have to, February 4th?
January 23rd.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're very close. The whole like save the world. I don't know. There's a part of me that's very altruistic. So in this process, I thought if I were to go out on my own, I didn't want to be the traditional consultant, and that's nothing against it. I had done some of that on the side. So many incredible people who are offering that, but I said I don't want to do that. Where can I bring value? What would spark joy for me? Because I had had that feeling of joy being sparked for a very long time. Back to the question, was fundraising fun? No, it was not. And when I look back, it wasn't that the work itself wasn't fun. It was the environment in which we were working. And so when I started to peel back those layers, I realized I wanted to do something that would support fundraisers primarily. What would have been nice to have had previously, I think what you mentioned to me as a support, a mentor, because when I landed on it, I'm like, we can do such a much better job for the people who work in organizations, and I don't want to accept this.
Yeah.
So that was the impetus and the spark for Mission Craft Partners, my business, with the thought that I would still talk about fundraising. I have the skill set. I've done major gifts. I've done capital campaign. I've done it all, but through this culture lens where we can talk about people working better together, addressing these, I had done another Substack Live about the elephant in the room, like all these crazy things that you find in nonprofits. Come to it with a framework, and you're laughing because you know what I'm talking about. Come with frameworks, a process, ideas that I had been working on. So I launched that this year in April, and I am so happy to be where I am.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's just the validation and speaking with people that, yes, there is a problem. And everyone always talked about the problem, but when I've been saying, yeah, it's a problem, but are we going to do something about it? Because you're seeing so many fundraisers flee the profession. I think about younger fundraisers who are like so excited to get in and get their feet wet and build a career, and then they're so quickly deflated. And I don't want that for people, because I've always wanted to be a mentor when I've managed great teams, younger fundraisers. I see their struggles. I know what I went through. That is really for Mission Craft, the mission, and that's why I use the word mission. In that I want us to do better by the people who work for our organizations, but particularly for fundraisers, because without the funding we need for these incredible mission-based organizations, you can't
exist.
You can't help people in your community. You can't, all the things, every kind of nonprofit, and particularly right now, because there's so many challenges with federal funding disappearing. Fundraisers are, they're feeling more stress burden. So I hope to be a positive light, and I am now working with a client who had gone through a lot of transition, their development team. I'm an interim director of development, bringing this cultural lens, and I love it.
Oh, wow.
Love it.
That's amazing.
It's a little bit about me.
Yeah. Before we dig into the problems, which we both know that there are many in the nonprofit world, just thinking about your experience, there are just so many similarities in my life, and hearing that you're an Aquarius too. I learned late in life that it's an air sign, which totally makes much more sense
than being a water sign, because you just assumed it was a water? Yes.
I did.
Yes.
I did. Maybe that's a typical Aquarius air sign thing to do. But I think that just making an assumption about us being similar, I gave everything. Like I'm really easy. I'm easy to keep happy. And I am a pleaser. And so in the workplace, when I have run up against people who are displeased with me, it's so confusing because it's like, okay,
I feel this in my bones. I understand it.
Because I'm like, okay, I'm listening. I can mold to whatever it is you need me to do. And I'm following through, and obviously you were following through because there was nothing on that PIP that said that you were not following through.
No.
And it's hard to realize that it's not you. It's not always us. And I think also what I'm learning about myself is that being this really flexible person, I'll stay and I'll hang out in situations that are not great for me, and I will make the most of it, and I can be happy, and I'm like, oh, it's fine. I stayed in my first job for 14 years, which is unheard of.
I certainly didn't, but that is impressive.
And so I've tried to reframe these horrible in the moment, like, God, what happened? And like, what's wrong with me? To be like, it is not me. It is not me.
It is not. And I have started to talk about the fact that, when you talk about culture, it feels soft and squishy. But what I have landed on, and if you've been reading any of my, Substack articles anywhere, culture is really infrastructure. Because you think about it, you can have the most incredible fundraising plan for the year. You can have everything all lined up. You can have a great team who are just at the top of their game. But if your culture is such a mess that people, number one, do not feel comfortable speaking up if they disagree, or if there are these unrealistic expectations from leadership board, all these things, there's a whole checklist, you're not going to be as successful as you can be. So if you even remove like the whole premise of people working in a healthy environment, you can look at this from a business financial perspective. I like to talk about the fact that a common issue in organizations, particularly nonprofits, there tends to always be this weird divide between a fundraising team and marketing and communication.
Right.
I think anyone listening to this would be like, oh yes. Like the silos, right? Like why? It's always driven me crazy. I've tried proactively to try to, close the gap. It's something I'm working on right now. Think about how much time is spent if your fundraiser and your marketing communications team are in this dysfunction because it comes from the top. They're not working well together. So that's time your fundraiser could be speaking with a donor, securing that gift. That could be time that the marketing team could be finalizing the annual report, which has a fundraising element to it. So if you really step back and think about it, there's also a financial burden to all this. That's not the primary lens that I focus on, but some people I think respond well when they stop and think like, how much money? So never mind when you are losing fundraisers. Think about it. So you have a fundraiser, you lose them, you have all the loss of the donor relationship. But then the expense to post the position, if you use a recruiter, the lost opportunity in that time frame, let's say it's going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 months, who knows, right? All of that is a loss for the organization. And then you have to start all over again. If you're still with this broken system, it just continues to repeat itself. So I am jumping up and down talking about this because I know we can do better and I want us to do better.
And I don't think people think about the long-term effects. And I'm curious about whether you've been able to quantify the downstream effects of losing a fundraiser. Or in my last example, our president moved on to another position and he held most of the relationships. And this is another real big issue with fundraising, is this ownership of relationships. If your executive director or president owns the relationships, you then have to do a lot of work to transition those relationships.
Really challenging.
And then this is what the role of the fundraiser should be, to bridge that gap. But then we had a long period of time before the board hired another president. That didn't work out. And then Trump happened. And so these relationships that we had worked so hard to build, it just was disheartening because I knew how much time it was going to be and how much was lost in all of the work and the heart that I had put in to building these relationships.
Yeah, I think so. What I have, I think I on Substack have an article. So you can take an example. Let's say your development director makes $100,000. You can actually do the math to figure out, okay, to recruit someone, you kind of know that there are hard costs in the recruitment. Then you can look at their donor portfolio. So depending upon the stage, you have donors in, with, let's say if they had a small portfolio. Development directors don't always have portfolios, but I'm just as an example. You can look at the portfolio and say, without someone in place and because of the lack of stewarding and moving these relationships forward, you're not going to book or, secure the $60,000 or whatever was in the portfolio. So when you start to add up the math, you could be talking about hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s for an organization that could be, 30-40% of their revenue. So there are financial costs, but there's so many human costs. And that's, I really talk a lot about the human costs because of my personal experiences and also what I have heard from so many other people and seen throughout the years, the true human costs and the trauma. And I use the word trauma because there is trauma. There's trauma while it's happening. I know, you can have the physical, mental impact. Then there's the trauma that you carry after this when you are asking yourself, In fact, I have one article I wrote about, that said, was I ever good at this? Then you're asking yourself and you're doubting yourself. And then you have to stop and say, no, I'm great at what I did. It was just this environment I was in. So many negative impacts that are holding our organizations back, because another tagline of mine that I kind of thought of initially was, when people thrive, missions flourish. Because it's so true. When you have people who are happy, who are being managed towards their strengths, not weaknesses, which I'd had that happen to me too. I use the example, I don't like Excel. Sometimes Excel comes in handy. And I was yelled at all the time about how horrible I was at Excel. So let's focus on the things like, I'm really good with people, I'm really good at moving conversations forward, but okay, Jan. I would say, sure, Jan, that meme, from the Brady Bunch. Sure, Jan. Yeah, okay, let's talk about Excel. Let's talk about the positive, which if you talk to me about what I do well and give me the room to grow, I'm going to stick around, but those things aren't happening, but why? So that's a lot of what I'm trying to peel back in this work.
Do you think that this is more prevalent in the fundraising field because there are so many different hats that we wear as fundraisers, and a lot of boards and executive directors kind of expect us to be able to be good at everything, and we have a lot on our plates all at the same time? And honestly, being a really great relationship builder is a very, very different skill set than using Excel or running a database or or even processing acknowledgement letters. It's a very different kind of person who enjoys and thrives in those relationships. But oftentimes you're in a shop of one, and
you're wearing the 18 hats. Yes.
And then you throw the leadership part of it, and a lot of fundraisers are then asked to help create the vision for the organization, and that is also a very, 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 and manage the board, which is my maybe least favorite thing to do.
You bring up a really good point, and something I talk a lot. So I developed a framework for mission craft. And one of the key pillars of the framework is clarity. When you don't have clarity, so we could apply that to everything. So when you are a development officer and the budget has been done and you're not given an opportunity to really chime in about the budget, about your donors in your portfolio or your grants, etc., and your leadership and the board approve a budget and they said, okay, here go. And you look and there's a 30% increase.
Probably in every single organization.
All the time. I have some more recent examples of this, working with others. That lack of clarity, first of all, sometimes it doesn't even come down to, so the organizational expenses for next year have grown significantly because you need to hire a new person. Okay, so you have this bottom line you need to meet, but there's an absence of the feedback conversation, the input from the people who are bringing in the money. So you have two problems there. There's a lack of clarity on how they came to that number. What is this arbitrary giant increase? And then there's a lack of clarity because the leadership doesn't have the clarity to understand that it's not going to be probably feasible to reach this gap. So a number has been put in as, I call it a plug.
Yeah.
A plug the gap. So then you put this pressure on the fundraisers and there's a lack of clarity, expectations are everywhere. So you can see this never ending cycle. Then your development staff is like, oh my gosh, they didn't get my input. I'm the one out there and I'm going to burn out trying to reach this unrealistic goal. It's you can just so clearly see how all these things happen. In the case when you have someone who is wearing multiple hats, that's even more depressing in a way because you're not in a large organization. How difficult would it have been to have those conversations? Mm-hmm. I can understand if you're working for a large federated organization and you've got bureaucracy and maybe it might be a little harder, not to say that can't happen. But it's particularly sad to me when you've got, 3 people on staff, a small board, and maybe an executive director. Why can't you have these conversations?
Right.
Why?
Yeah. No, yeah. That's a really, really great point. Do you think that part of this is a function of the type of person that's attracted to nonprofit work? And I ask that because maybe this is an Aquarius air sign thing too. I'm eternally optimistic, yes. And all of the fundraisers, without exception, that I've worked with see that unrealistic number and they're like, we can do it. And they're very, very hopeful. I'm probably the least hopeful person that I have like I try to insert the reality and people are like, no, we just believe. And maybe they're just like manifestors.
Maybe.
But that's where the burnout comes. And that's where like I've tried to insert reality into there. Well, can we change this from the get-go because this isn't realistic? And then even board members are pretty idealistic when they come into nonprofits, and they're not necessarily, even if they have been in the business world, they're not helping the nonprofit apply tried and true business strategy to the nonprofit world. Why do you think that is?
So back to your point about the type of people that I think I would agree with you. There are people, especially fundraisers, who I think meet a certain criteria, and that's what draws you to you. I will say, in doing my own work on myself, the people pleasing. I'm not saying that this applies for everyone, but I know in my case, I think that I was attracted to this work because I was a people pleaser. Coming from a somewhat traumatic family situation, I think I know I carried a lot of that, and that I'm just speaking for me. Mm-hmm. So the people pleasing was already ingrained in me. And so if you come in and you see, oh, I have this opportunity to bring people, to matchmake them, to make them happy, they'll give more money. I do think there's an element of that you attract those type of people. And I think when I was younger, I was much more optimistic maybe than I am now. Maybe that's because you go through some stuff, right? But I think I definitely agree with you. I think that it attracts these kind of personalities similar to what I expressed about myself. Then you have board members who are, motivated by various things. You have a board member who is on the board because they were personally impacted by something. Or they're like, oh, I represent my company, I was put in this, and And what you said about they don't necessarily apply their business skills in a way, my experience has been more like, well, I don't know a lot about fundraising, but why can't you call Bill Gates?
Yeah, right.
Yes. That also is on us as a sector, the training and the managing expectations on what a board member role should be. I think that's we could have a whole separate podcast on that. But they don't understand. They mean well. They have these unrealistic expectations. I would be a wealthy woman if every time a board member said, well, why don't we do a gala or a new special event? I feel dread just saying that in my internal body right now. Special events. They mean well, but they also know what they know, and if they haven't been educated. So I think you end up with this really interesting combination of personalities. Again, the lack of clarity when there's not education, and it ends up with this hot mixed mess that is ripe for dysfunction.
Mm-hmm. And then I think a lot of people are finding themselves in the situation now, and this was definitely the situation that I was in, that when millions and millions of dollars gets pulled from you, you then go into crisis, survival mode, and then all of the issues that already existed then grow exponentially. And then as a fundraiser, then you have 20 people coming at you and saying, well, why don't we just call that person? You haven't called that person yet. What about Mackenzie Scott?
She's very popular. If you're in our world, you will know what we mean.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, fundraising takes time. It's all about the relationship. If the relationship doesn't exist already, especially in this moment that we're in right now, where everyone who has the ability to help an organization understands that not every organization can be saved. That their $10,000, $100,000, even $1 million is going to help that individual organization last for a very finite period of time. And there's no systemic plan, unless the federal government starts infusing money into the system again, for everyone to be saved, or even a small percentage to be saved. What are you finding right now? How are people, because I have been out, it is now the end of August, and I have not been a fundraiser since the middle of April. And I have joyfully been not paying attention to what's going on. But has that chaos calmed down? Are people feeling hopeful? Are there pathways opening up?
It's a good question. So when the federal funding reality hit, I was thinking to myself, same thing that you said. Not every organization is going to survive this. What types of organizations are going to survive? And I really thought about the culture piece. If an organization is nimble, flexible, willing to look at things differently, then I think those are the organizations that we are going to see survive. I should say, being the optimist or recovering optimist or whatever I was, I thought, how can you look at this horrible situation, challenge, and look for the opportunity? And I said, if you have such a huge cut in your budget, your staff are going to have to work harder. Here is an opportunity to start working and creating the kind of environment where you can do that in a healthy way. That's where you need to figure out, okay, right now, we really need marketing, communications, and fundraising to get their act together in this silo, but it's got to come from leadership. So if the leader can model that and say, listen, this is a hard time, but here's an opportunity for us to work better together, to figure out where we can address issues, do the hard work, then I think those are the organizations that are going to survive. Is every organization of the mindset to do that? Sadly, no. And I think you see a lot of organizations that are not growth-minded, and I talk a lot about that. I've always been one I think has been growth-minded. When you have leaders who are not growth-minded, then they can't see through the trees.
But and I think growth-minded in the sense of turning 5 million into
correct.
10 million.
Yeah. No, growth-minded in that like, let's look at new opportunities to rethink how we work, how we engage with ourselves internally, how our teams work together, how we interact with donors. So it takes a growth-minded person to see that. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not. And I think that's where we're going to see organizations that will grow, that will be able to survive this federal funding cut. And then others may go away, sadly, but survival of the fittest. And I think the culture piece is really important. It's a really important piece of that.
Donors, for the most part, are not aware of the internal culture of the organization. But I think that they can feel it, especially if you become a board member. In what ways does the culture then project out to the outside world?
I have specific examples, but I'll talk more broadly. I think when an organization internally is dysfunctional, people aren't talking to each other. How it's going to show up is that, and this has happened before somewhere I've worked, you have a corporate partner. You have a leader who is obsessed with that relationship, won't let go of it. Then you have a corporate partnership manager or someone who's also working on that. Here's an example. When your culture is such that no one's on the same page, people are possessive. How it's going to show up for a partner is an executive director reaching out about something, not sharing that information, not keeping her team in the loop, and then having someone who is a director, whatever, also approaching that partner with a similar ask or statement, and the partner's like, I just spoke with. That's like a simple, and that's like a simple, more less dangerous example. But people are going to see if you are not gelled together internally, and I just use that as one on a corporate partner level versus if you had a major donor. I suspect your major donors who are your top donors who are or more engaged than me on the board, they probably are really going to feel that dysfunction from a major gifts officer to the president and CEO. So that's just one simple example, but people are smart. You can pick up when you know that people aren't talking to each other. And that's just one symptom of the issue. Like the communication is challenged internally, but people are going to pick up on that because you don't have your act together, and it's going to impact what you're doing externally. Because I've seen that, and it's cringy.
Yes, yeah, small examples and very large examples.
Yeah. Very, very large examples. But I think right now we are still in the midst of the federal funding challenges. I think organizations some are trying to figure out how to work better. I know one organization that decided to decline a second federal payment. Luckily, the organization was financially secure enough, but now are shifting to focusing on municipal, state, and local gifts, which is smart, right? How to do that. But it's going to take a commitment from leadership to be able to do that. There is an element of the bottom up, But we know the reality is a leader has to model that. The organization, the board, the leadership has to model that to be growth minded so that everyone can kind of come on board and do that and figure out how can we all figure out where are the opportunities and be open to feedback.
Yeah.
That's a whole other. Communication is also another one of my framework pillars. Yes. Yeah.
I think something else that organizations are confronted with right now is, as much as nonprofits do not like to admit it, they are donor driven in a lot of respects. And
Very much so.
when a huge donor, the federal government, pulls their funding, I think a lot of organizations are now like, okay, who are we now?
What's our identity?
Yeah, who are we? Who are we actually serving? Because these huge federal grants were put out as a call, and the organizations have to kind of massage a little bit or a lot what it is that they're doing in order to secure that money. And organizations don't like to admit that they do it, but they do. It's just a fact of the matter. An individual donor comes, says, I will give you $5 million, but can you do things a little bit? I don't know any organization that is going to not try to figure out a way to accept that money, because it's hard. It's really, really hard to keep going as a nonprofit organization. What are you seeing in terms of healthy ways of reevaluating who we are right now and unhealthy ways?
It's a really good point, and what you said resonates with me. I know that on my end, I talk about the power of no. I'm going to flip it a little bit and then kind of get to your question. I think organizations that either are newer or had challenges with fundraising are definitely ones that prescribe to that. We just need our money. Let's just figure out how to make it work. I think the organizations that are more growth minded and thinking long term and really landing on what their mission is will embrace the power of no. I have been one to say, yeah, on paper, this opportunity, this funding opportunity looks great, but what are the hard and soft costs? I developed a matrix now that I have for Mission Craft, like a go, no-go matrix. So when you're looking at grant opportunities, for example, what are the kinds of questions you should be asking yourselves internally? And it's okay to say no, but it's really scary. But I think so you're seeing organizations now who are now having to question, okay, we need the funding to survive, and maybe they shouldn't survive, back to our point. But how do we keep from the mission creep, which is something, a phrase that we hear in this, how do we stay true to the nature? There's always going to be probably a little bit of going outside that circle, but how do we stay true and not just say yes to everything? So I talk about the power no tied to that. So I think organizations now in this evolution are going to have, I don't know if it's strategic planning with their boards, and let staff have a voice in these conversations. Yeah. And that's the piece that I keep jumping up and down about. You can have all these great strategic conversations, but everybody has to have a voice at the table. And I think, to answer your question, that is what is needed right now to say, okay, our identity, because 80% of our organization was funded by this huge grant from HUD or whatever it was. So how do we position ourselves as an organization that has a need, has a solid, team, has made an impact in our community? How do we do that in a strategic way, but everyone's voice has to be represented? And I honestly feel that is what is key to organizations being able to move forward. When everybody has a voice, people are heard, and not to say what you say is going to be automatically taken in as part of the plan, but if you only have a fraction of your organization leadership making the decisions about what it's going to look like, the reality is the people who are here are the ones doing the work primarily. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And unfortunately, in the crisis mode, people are less likely to take the time to have those conversations.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of organizations are not going to make it. Or are there opportunities there for organizations to merge and leverage resources together? I think that's exciting to me. Like, we know there's so many nonprofits, and sometimes they are very similar, not to say they shouldn't existed, but here's a great opportunity to say, why don't we merge and join forces? Then organizationally we can be stronger, the securing funding. But again, it takes people who are open and growth-minded to think it would be okay to do that.
Here's an unsolicited tip. If you are merging organizations, keep your fundraisers from both organizations. Don't choose one or the other.
I take this from personal.
Oh, well, but
Yeah. Yes.
I can see
Correct.
that would be the decision making. Well, okay, well, we're going to merge. We're going to keep the teams the same size. There are some teams that perhaps can stay the same size, maybe a communications team, but the fundraising teams need to stay intact for both for the newly formed organization to survive.
Yes, I think really smart organizations know how important it is to invest in fundraising versus others may like, oh, well, we can just eliminate that position. Yikes. You know, and so, but I'm going to be really excited to see. I say excited, hoping that from this will be positive in a very difficult time. And there's a lot of dread and fear. And I think we all are feeling it with the state of the U.S. right now. But I think nonprofits need to get their act together and really think about how to reimagine, recreate. And I'm one who's just advocating, can we have the culture piece be part of this? Because culture is infrastructure.
It is. And I think even more broadly than in nonprofits, I think that's the moment that we're in. I think everyone internally and externally is wondering about all of these structures that lead and direct our lives in so many ways. And have they been the best thing to serve us?
Yes. I hope that we come out on the other side of this. First of all, I hope we come out on the other side of this. But I hope we come out on the other side of this where there's positive change. And I still have the optimist in me that hopes for that.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes you're just like, I'm going to go hide under my bed. I'm not sure.
Also optimistic. And I will also say that I think fundraisers play an important role in rethinking the structures that we're all a part of. Because let's talk a little bit about, I believe, and this is my experience as a fundraiser, I think some of the most successful fundraisers use their intuition and are feelers and can sense when you're sitting down with a donor. Not only is it the logical, like remembering what their spouse's name is and their kids and where they went on vacation and all the things that you would put in a file, you need to be able to sense if this is the right moment to ask for a gift or and all of that happens in your gut. Talk a little bit about your experience with that.
Yes, I love this. I knew we would go in that direction because that's the hat that you wear and your kind of growing expertise in the area. I would agree that a fundraiser has to have that. We talk about being a people person, but it goes beyond that. You can be in a conversation, and so the intuition plays into when you pick up on things that people say, or you just feel a shift in the vibe. Worked in healthcare, I've worked for cancer organizations, and that is a very personal, heartfelt, difficult place to be when you're talking about raising money for cancer or treatments or whatever it may be. But there's something to be said about being an active listener.
Yes, that's the most important thing about being a fundraiser.
Being an active listener, letting the individual or the people in the room with you speak. And then you can, if you are really in tune with your intuition, which I think I have always been, then you can pick up on the things that they say. You can see the change in their face. I have literally felt a shift in the energy in the room. And I'm not even being woo-woo, right? Like you just literally feel that shift. And so your goal is to take that and ask the follow-up questions so that you can have a really meaningful conversation so that you understand what is motivating that individual or the family. And that's where you're setting things up for success. And I think the fundraisers that are good at that do it in a meaningful way. Like it's not sales. Yes, we say there's a sales element, but I want to be in tune with people so that I can help them create their vision for philanthropy to invest in an organization that will feel good to them and their family. That's 100%.
That's exactly how I've seen my role as a fundraiser. You're helping facilitate good feelings.
You are.
Because you're giving somebody a gift by helping them figure out a way to provide meaning in their own lives. And legacy is something else that people think about a lot. It's not sales. If you believe in your mission, especially, but even if you're kind of like on the edge of
what am I doing?
But it's the donor. If it makes the donor feel good to provide this gift, then you're raising the vibration of the earth to get a little woo and making everybody feel good and moving things in a positive direction.
I've always said to my teams, I've said over the year, I feel like, like they're Tina-isms. And I always say that people should be given an opportunity to give. Don't make assumptions, but listen and learn so you understand the why. I mean, I think I've always been powered by my own why. I think now, like I would say probably in your work and same, like the why behind it, but that's also with a donor, the why behind it. But unless we give people opportunity to talk and for us to listen, there's a little bit of a wall there.
Exactly.
And I think given now so many challenges, the listening is even more important. Yeah. It always was important. Mm-hmm. But, there's competition now with nonprofits, and especially if nonprofits are losing federal funding, that competition thing is a real thing. Even in the community here in Charlottesville, there's a lot of competition from the same donors. But I think so many people, if you give them opportunity to give, everyone's going to be able to be supported and have those. So, yeah, it's definitely, yes, but the intuition thing is right on. And I've had situations where my intuition has yelled and said something's not right about this. Even from the context of donors, corporate partners, I've even had that icky feeling, and I've always been one to listen to it because it usually is right on.
Yep. Yes, I also have had many situations where that has happened. And sometimes you're able to act on it, and other times you're not. And you just have to swallow the icky feeling and move forward.
Well, I think also as a fundraiser, sadly, talking about the culture work, I've had the icky feelings with people who I have to work with. So there's also that element of that. There can be red flags there, but that whole trust your gut, I know it's a lot of work you do, is so true, that there's a reason you're feeling and having that reaction to that person. And it's figuring out how to best navigate that. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's
Exactly. Going back to you starting out your career in the arts, I was reminded of the wonderful show, I'm sure you've seen it, Mozart in the Jungle, which is probably the only depiction of fundraisers in, in movies and TV.
I don't think so. That's a really good question.
If you don't know the show, it's been a long time since
it's on
I've
Amazon. It was an
watched
Amazon show, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't even know if it's on anymore, but what was it, the New York Opera? Was that? And just the characters that were portrayed were so, I never worked in the arts, but in doing fundraising work, you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, 100%, this is what it's like. And in those organizations, the fundraisers have to kind of be in the world of their very arts-focused, very, very wealthy donors. I've never been wealthy myself, and I kind of find myself to be somewhat of a chameleon where I can go into somebody's billion-dollar home and not feel out of place, because that's really important when you're building relationships, or that you can hang wherever you go without actually being the same as the person. But it seemed like in the arts organizations, in that show, there was like a push to kind of be the same, wear the jewelry, wear the clothes. Was that your experience in the arts? Is that true?
I have seen some of that. I had felt, I think, as a younger fundraiser, I had some occasions I was working in DC with diplomat wives and galas and oh my, diplomats, galas, oh my, you could do a whole meme about it, right? I was not one to feel like I needed to be at that level. I also could very well speak and engage with. But I did see other people, and even an executive director who I felt like was trying to kind of match that and be in a way that they felt like they were on the same class level. That never was me, but I think that's certainly predominant. We could have a whole conversation about philanthropy. I'm going to say the word DEI. Gosh, Britt, I just wrote the other day about class. I don't know if you had read that about class. Great, I had read an article on LinkedIn about a woman who worked more on the global NGO stage and was talking about class and assimilation and people on teams. And it really sparked something in me to think about the class. And that speaks exactly what you talked about with in the arts. I think when you look at where philanthropy has a certain element of the galas, the arts, like coming together. Average people don't go to the opera, then you do see a lot more of that than perhaps like your social service organization. Not to say it doesn't exist, but I think there's so many interesting things about looking at DEI culture how people are given the opportunity to be themselves, whatever they bring into work. We could do a whole other series on that, and I just did write about that the other day. But I do remember in my earlier years some really interesting experiences with particularly a wife of a diplomat in DC, which we won't go into.
Yeah.
I will say she made me cry.
Oh.
I did go in my office and cry, and this was around a gala. I can look back at it now and kind of laugh a little bit and say you were young. You know, it was understandable. And that was my previous people-pleasing era, which now I've kind of recovered from. But yeah, I definitely had some experience like that where people were operating at just a whole totally different level. But I never felt that I needed to like be like them. I just needed to be able to work.
Exactly. Yeah. Same with me as well. So Tina, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And so what's next for you? What are you excited about? And we didn't talk about Substack and building a business.
Substack. So we are like Substack cheerleaders.
We are.
I never was a cheerleader, but
be paying us.
Yeah, pom-poms. So Substack, you know, I had been writing on LinkedIn for a while when I decided to come out and be my true self. And I think you and I had talked about it. You'd seen that I had talked about being a positive disruptor.
Yeah.
And I think after I did my own personal internal work and a lot of therapy, I'm not gonna lie, and a lot of family things, and I realized the people pleasing, I just was tired of not saying things about things that bothered me, and I know why. And so even in that past position where you know, I was forced out essentially, I had tried to proactively bring things up and be positive. And I was disrupting, saying, we don't have to keep doing things this way, but they were not growth minded, and hence didn't work out. But finding my voice. And I think that's what I love about Substack, is that you can be your true self in a positive place. LinkedIn, I had started doing that, and I found LinkedIn is so wonky and it's not quite the same. I wasn't having these like real conversations, which now I'm able to have on Substack and other people. So that's why I'm a big fan. I'm still putting stuff on LinkedIn, but in terms of mission craft, you know, it's always trying to figure out the business piece of it. I've been really fortunate in that I found where I can bring value is these situations where I can be an interim, or I can be, you know, a fractional interim. You know, they're different work. Like right now I'm an interim development director. I'll be with the team through the end of December when they have a new director come on and help with the transition. I think an opportunity to bring that cultural lens and look at how teams are working together. I'm excited soon. I'm going to debut a culture snapshot, which will be, dare I say, a chat GPT created. I'm creating my own GPT. So someone can say, let me answer these 12 questions. It could be an ED. And it will provide a high level, here where you have some challenges, here are some opportunities. And then I would hope to have the opportunity to build a plan and work with a team. Again, to get people to work better together, get marketing and development, even finance and programs, but also being able in a neutral way to perhaps coach an ED who really means well by their team. Their team sees things differently, and have them come to the middle and work better together. That's the next phase. I have all these ideas because I really want our sector to do better by the people, particularly fundraisers. I would love to see culture embedded in any kind of training. If you're a fundraiser, there's the CFRE. Why can't culture be part of the exam? So I have these big picture ideas, but right now I'm really just trying to get people talking about culture being infrastructure. What are the challenges within teams? What can you do better as a leader and be more responsive? And maybe you don't have a high EQ, and that's okay. But the fact that you are interested and want to do better by your team. But then also I had an opportunity to have like a mentoring call with a young fundraiser, and heard in her voice a lot of what I experienced when she had a bad situation in her first job. You know, so I also want to be supportive and tell people to give yourself grace, that you're not crazy, you did a good job, but you're fighting this dysfunctional system. So my goal, though, is just to continue to help people have larger conversations about why this is so important. Yeah,
and I'm finding too, as in creating a business, I think it's an opportunity and a challenge that you can have that growth mindset, and you can shift and kind of like, if something is working, if it's feeling good,
Yes.
you can do more of that when you're working for yourself and not for other people. And then if something is like, oh, this isn't working,
then you
can
just
cut
move on.
it. Yeah, cut
And
it
you
out
can
right
move
away.
on.
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't even been a year. There's a lot of trial and error to this, but I did just launch my website finally. It's funny, I use Substack kind of as my website now. My website has Substack embedded into it.
Oh, good.
Not really. I figured out how to do that, but I want to support organizations primarily that want to make sure that their staff are being treated humanely, being supported, because ultimately that will help people raise more money, serve more people. It's not a crazy idea.
It's not.
It's just never been brought to the forefront, and I'm trying to be, as I said, that positive disruptor, saying, hey, we need to keep talking about this. You may not agree with me. I've had some really interesting comments on LinkedIn from people who have said some really negative things. I'll just share one comment was, I was talking about, your fundraisers are leaving and you really need to think about why that's happening. And I always try to present things in a way that are thoughtful, positive, but thought-provoking. And I had some gentleman who was a CFRE use the words like, how dare you blame that on the board and the board and the executive director when your fundraisers don't know what they're doing. And I looked at that as a learning opportunity for this gentleman. I paused. I didn't write what I really wanted to write, but I took a pause and I said, really interesting that you shared your feedback in this way. This is why we need to have these conversations.
Exactly.
And then he deleted his comments after that.
Oh.
But at the same time, I wasn't a jerk back to him.
Yeah.
He didn't need to be that way, but this is exactly why we're having these conversations, and maybe you could benefit from the work I'm doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's such an important time to be doing this too, as everyone is kind of rethinking, putting culture at the forefront when it's really been like an afterthought.
But I'm excited for both of us to continue our work, and I would love to dig more into the intuition thing with you, because we just touched briefly on it in our conversation. But I think I want to focus on the humane element, the people, and the intuition thing is something that I've always really tapped into, drawn into, and we could go in a whole different direction.
Maybe we are birthing some kind of course on teaching fundraisers how to listen to their intuition.
I think we need to think about that.
Thank you so much, Tina. This has been so much fun.
I really enjoyed it, and here's to anyone recovering as a fundraiser. There's life afterwards, and if you are a fundraiser, give yourself grace. You're awesome, and sometimes you're just in environments that are not supporting you and letting you thrive, and I hope that one day that we'll see a change in that.
Exactly.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Goddess in Training. I hope something in this episode stirred your knowing or softened your heart. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it, or leave a review or comment to help others find us. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to hear more conversations like this, please consider supporting Goddess in Training on Patreon. For more tools and offerings to deepen your intuition practice, visit goddessintraining.online. You can also join the Scroll of Sashat on Substack for twice-weekly stories of how I followed my intuition. The music for Goddess in Training is Madre Ayahuasca by Arkawa, and you can find more of his music in the link to his website in the show notes. Remember, your intuition is not a mystery, it's a memory. Keep listening.
Resplandor del fuego, estrellita, tabaco santo, fuerza de rapel, soplo de luz, soplo encantado, viajecito, bendición del cielo, fortaleza, tigrecito de la selva, madre haya